Understood checkmark. Here's section 1 as a script-style narration, minimum 500 words, no headings, no scene directions, no filler or repetition. It's written tightly, keeping the mysterious and infidelity-driven tone. The Utah Territory in 1847 was a land of dust, silence, and whispered secrets. Travelers who pushed westward came seeking opportunity, but they also carried with them shadows of the past, and few embodied this duality more than Mr. Elijah Whitmore. He arrived with polished boots, a sharp tongue, and the kind of charm that unsettled both friend and stranger. Men respected him for his decisiveness and the wealth he carried, while women found themselves caught in the warmth of his gaze, unsure whether it was sincerity or a practiced trick. He built quickly, land, cabins, livestock, his presence a rising pillar in a settlement desperate for leadership. Yet behind the smooth veneer, there was something he never allowed others to see fully, and those who pried too deeply found themselves staring into a well without a bottom. What raised eyebrows at first seemed innocent enough. Whitmore was often absent at odd hours, riding alone beneath the moon with no explanation. His absence, however, did not match the impression of a solitary man. Around town, whispers grew, little fragments of gossip that clung to his name. He smiled when asked about his late-night ventures, dismissing questions with a laugh or a half-truth. For a time, it worked. But those who lived nearest to his land knew better. They had seen unfamiliar silhouettes walking between cabins, women tending to gardens on separate plots of soil, each with eyes only for Whitmore. Few in town dared to speak it aloud, but the truth settled into the air like smoke. Elijah Whitmore was not a man tied to a single wife. He was bound to 4. Each was kept apart, given a cabin of her own, each convinced she was his only. To one, he was tender and pious, quoting scripture to prove his devotion. To another, he was ambitious, promising her a life of wealth and stature. To the next, he was the poet, whispering words that dripped with passion. And to the youngest, he was daring, promising adventure and destiny. He played his roles so convincingly that none doubted their claim to his heart. The arrangement might have lasted hidden, if not for the little cracks that appeared in his careful design. One woman's shawl, left behind in the wrong cabin, carried a perfume too distinct to be ignored. Another found a ring, engraved with initials not her own, tucked inside a drawer. He covered these mistakes with explanations, an old possession, a neighbor's trinket, a borrowed scarf. But explanations breed suspicion, and suspicion, once seeded, grows like wildfire. Even so, Whitmore carried himself as though untouchable. In gatherings, he stood tall, his voice steady, as though the truth of his entanglements would never surface. He was practiced at concealing the edges of his life, but he underestimated the determination of those closest to him. The wives did not yet know of each other fully, but the air was shifting, and with each day the tension thickened. His empire of affection was delicate, and the first tremor of betrayal had. Got it checkmark. Here's section 3 as a 500+ word narration script, no headings, no repetition of earlier sections, keeping it sharp, emotional, and focused on betrayal and unraveling. It began with chance, as betrayal often does. Abigail, carrying supplies to town, crossed paths with Margaret. Their words were polite at first, each woman cautious, yet Abigail noticed something she could not explain. Margaret spoke of Whitmore with a familiarity that felt too close, too intimate. A slip of a phrase, a way she referred to him, stirred unease in Abigail's chest. She asked a simple question, testing the waters, and Margaret's guarded silence told her more than an answer could. From that moment, the seed of suspicion bloomed, and it was only a matter of time before the veil would fall away. Eliza's discovery came not through words but through a trinket. A locket slipped from Whitmore's coat one evening, etched with an inscription that mirrored the vows he had whispered to her under the stars. But the initials inside were not her own. She held it in her hand, trembling, as realization struck. The man who told her she was irreplaceable had given the same promises to another. She hid her heartbreak, waiting for clarity, but silence offered none. Each glance from him felt sharper now, every smile hollow, and love that once sustained her began to taste of betrayal. Catherine's turn arrived in shadows. Searching for Whitmore after a long absence, she entered a cabin she believed abandoned. Inside she found scraps of letters, delicate handwriting not her own, words filled with tenderness that mirrored the ones she had cherished. Her youthful certainty collapsed. She tried to convince herself there was an explanation, yet each line on the page burned the truth deeper into her mind. She was not alone in his heart, and perhaps never had been. One by one, the wives pieced together the fragments. Their anger was different, but it was united. Abigail felt her faith had been mocked, the vows she treasured desecrated. Margaret raged at the theft of her ambition, realizing she had been no more than another pawn in Whitmore's pursuit of control. Eliza's grief was heavy, dragging her into silence, while Catherine's hurt was sharp and raw, a wound carved into innocence. Together, they formed a quiet bond, not of choice but necessity, linked by betrayal. The settlement soon felt the ripples. Neighbors whispered louder now, no longer rumors but suspicions turning into near certainty. Whitmore's disappearances, his polished excuses, his air of untouchable confidence, none could hide what was unraveling. He had been too arrogant, believing himself master of affection, never imagining the women would compare their truths and see the pattern of lies. His empire of secrecy crumbled not with violence but with revelation, and revelation proved far more devastating. For the wives, the pain was more than personal. In a land where reputation defined survival, shame now loomed over them, though none of the guilt was theirs. Whitmore had not only divided their hearts, he had placed their very lives at risk. To love a man who belonged to another was scandal, but to be deceived into such a bond was ruin. Their futures trembled under the weight of his betrayal, yet beneath the sorrow burned something fiercer, a resolve that his deceptions would no longer bind them. Whitmore, still confident in his ability to charm and persuade, sensed only fragments of the storm he had created. He believed the women too loyal, too dependent, too blind to betray him. He was wrong, trust had been shattered, and in its place grew something unstoppable. They no longer saw him as the man who had promised them everything, they saw him for what he truly was, a deceiver, a manipulator, a man who had traded love for control. The path forward was uncertain, but one truth had become clear. His dominion over their hearts was ending, and the reckoning he had evaded for so long was already at his door. Resolution. Abigail was the first. She had followed Whitmore westward, believing him to be a man of conviction and moral strength. In her heart, he was her anchor in a land that shifted daily with uncertainty. She cooked for him, prayed with him, and trusted every word he spoke, convinced that his long absences were sacrifices for their shared future. Her loyalty was steadfast, and her devotion blind, yet beneath her gentleness there lingered questions she dared not ask aloud. A devoted wife in her eyes, she was unaware of the storm waiting just beyond her cabin door. Margaret was fire, as different from Abigail as dawn from dusk. She had been wooed with promises of wealth, a house larger than any in the territory, and a status among settlers that no woman could rival. Whitmore whispered to her that she would stand at his side as he built an empire, and she clung to that dream, ignoring the uneasy sense that he gave the same vows too easily. Margaret demanded more from him than time, she wanted proof, she wanted riches, she wanted his unwavering presence. His absences gnawed at her, and while she tried to smother her doubts with ambition, suspicion crept steadily into her thoughts. Eliza was different still, quiet, thoughtful, she was a painter of words and feelings, not walls or rooms. She had been captured not by Whitmore's promises of wealth but by the tenderness in his voice, the verses he recited under starlight, the sense that he saw her soul more clearly than anyone else ever had. She built her days around him, storing away every letter he wrote, every trinket he gave her, each token a reminder that she was cherished. For Eliza, love was sacred, and Whitmore had convinced her that she was the only one who carried his true heart. The strength of that belief would make the fall far more devastating when the truth crept in. Catherine was the youngest, bold and unafraid, drawn to Whitmore's adventurous nature. He spoke to her of destiny, of journeys still untaken, of places they would travel together. His words gave her wings, and she embraced him as though she were chosen for a purpose greater than herself. In her innocence, she mistook his flattery for truth, and she trusted too deeply, convinced that he was unlike any man she had ever known. What she did not see was that her passion was only another thread in the web he spun, and like the others, she was held in place by lies. Each wife believed her bond unique, yet his stories began to overlap. A phrase Abigail once held as sacred escaped his lips to Margaret. A necklace Eliza treasured was mirrored by the ring Catherine received. What should have been tokens of fidelity became clues of betrayal. Their lives, once separate, began to brush against each other in ways impossible to ignore. A fabric left in a trunk smelled of perfume not their own. A message tucked in a pocket contained words too familiar to belong to another. Each woman dismissed the first sign, but the unease deepened, and unease turned to doubt. The threads of Whitmore's deception were tightening. He had convinced himself that he could hold 4 hearts without fracture, that he could balance affection as a man might balance accounts, but love is not currency, and betrayal cannot remain buried forever. The wives stood on the edge of discovery, and although none yet knew the full truth, the illusion was faltering, the mask slipping. What began as romance was already transforming into something dangerous, and the weight of his secrets pressed heavier with every passing day.